morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the video broadcast. Don't do it like Joe. All about family, friends, football, and Forex. And we got introduced through a friend of mine. And I would like to welcome Caroline Hunt-Matthes. Is that correct, Matthes, or how do you speak your name?
It's Matthes, actually, but that's perfect, Joe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. At least I got one thing right in the morning. Yeah. So where are you? How are you? And how are things going, Caroline?
Well, I am right this minute. I'm in the UK just for a short period. It's the weather's miserable as it usually is, but maybe we'll get some sunshine this weekend. And yes, everything good. Just balancing, investigating with grading for university professors at the minute, and trying to finish the book which I'm working on.
Fantastic. You mentioned already investigating, you mentioned university, you mentioned the book. Now, I found 3 titles for you, Caroline. I show it to you. Which one suits you the best? International Human Rights Investigator, or Adjunct Professor Ethics, or Diversity Expert and Speaker? Which one would you prefer?
I think the simplest is just Caroline, Joe, because I'm all of those things.
Wonderful, wonderful. But as we had them already now, Caroline, I have heard from you and only good things. Yeah. Also, the person who referred me to you or introduced us has only good words about you. You are very helpful, very knowledgeable, very professional, very hardworking. But tell us, how did you get in this topic, ethics and whistleblowing and retaliation? And it's a very specific topic. How did you get there where you are right now, Caroline?
Well, I was just reflecting. Obviously, you didn't speak to my husband because he would have heard a few things that are less than perfect if you had. But back to your question, how did I evolve into this particular role? I think I've always been interested in investigation. I trained as a lawyer. I did some cutting edge work in the United States in my youth, where I was reinvestigating cases of high profile children's cases. And I was also looking at the issue of reinvestigating domestic abuse or intimate partner abuse cases. And I just took that into my work with the UN, my first assignment in Rwanda for the very first pioneering human rights mission, which looked into the facts of the genocide and prepared the evidence for the Arusha Tribunal. And yes, I then, continued on that path. And of course, whistleblowing is integral to the investigation role because you rely very much on evidence and people's willingness to speak up. And as any good investigator will tell you, people fear speaking up. They fear, can they trust a system? And then I had the unenviable experience of becoming a whistleblower myself, because as you probably know, most people don't actually choose the path. It kind of is inflicted upon you, as it were.
Okay, so you basically had your personal case, your personal story, and then you it developed from there. You want to tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, well, I think what was remarkable about my own particular case is it was 15 years in duration with the litigation. And one of the things that took me into the area of whistleblowing research was my own personal experience, because so little, is understood about it. But my particular case was rooted in my work. I was 10 years with the UN, very happy in different roles with different organizations. And I come from an investigation role at the World Food Programme into the Refugee Agency. And the investigation function in the agency was a new function. And most of the people in the office had not been trained in as investigators. So, and it was not an independent office, the Office of Inspector General. And some of the practices concerned me, which I reported to my supervisors and so forth, but it wasn't very well received. And I found myself marginalized and then ultimately fired for reporting my concerns about the way investigations were being conducted. And the most, I think the seminal case that I worked on was a rape of a refugee in Sri Lanka. And the obstruction that I encountered during that was unacceptable in any terms. And so, yes, I reported it. And unfortunately, I was not protected by the UN system in place to protect whistleblowers like myself. And I lost my job. And then after that, I had 15 years of litigation before I got an apology. And the matter is settled. So I'm happy that that's behind me now. But what message does that send to anybody that wants to report corruption is not an inspiring message.
It's incredible. Yes, just by coincidence, this morning in LinkedIn, I did also a small comment on compliance officer about we basically allow to build a system which allows a lot of things happening which nobody wants to happen or let to happen. And then we complain that we have so much corruption and wrongdoing worldwide. So what year was it that you blew the whistle, basically?
Well, we have this, what we call internal whistleblowers and external whistleblowers. So I was an internal whistleblower. So I flagged to my supervisors at the very outset in 2003, actually, that I had some concerns about the way the office was being managed. And in fact, my supervisors at the time agreed with me. But at some point later, it became quite political and, all of that, flipped. But yes, it was, 2003, the original, whistleblowing.
Not going into details, but in the end, you were right, I guess, because there was a lot of movement since, and also discoveries in the UN, and they have also confessed partially, at least, what I am aware of. But when you are now working with the UN,
now I'm an independent investigator, but I do work in humanitarian space, which means that I'm contracted by various international NGOs, sometimes an agency of the UN to do work for them. I'm no longer a staff member whose duty it is to report. I'm an independent investigator, so I'm just hired as an independent to give my opinion or to conduct an investigation on behalf of an organization who most often won't have policies and procedures in place or resources to have an investigator.
For example, like UN can give you basically an outsourced contract or another NGO. Do you work exclusively for NGOs, or are you also working in the private industry, like for banks or hedge funds or something else?
I'm mostly working in humanitarian NGO space, but I have had inquiries and do give help to private organizations on occasion. Okay.
So, Caroline, very interesting. Tell me one thing, like in reviewing the last, let's say, until 2003 till now, the biggest challenges in your basically new profession now as an investigator to make the world a better place. What are the biggest challenges you face on a daily or on a weekly, monthly basis?
Well, I think one of the issues which we're seeing has become very evident in COVID is that we have many of our institutions or governments in which we place a great deal of faith and integrity I become quite frustrated by the culture of denial, where organizations just batten down the hatches, and they want no discussion. And I think that everybody realizes that very often these issues emerge from mistakes or bad practice, and has been resistance in the past to open dialogue with civil society on how to improve, many of the problems that come from lack of whistleblower protection, if you like.
Okay. So when you do your investigation and you find some people who are willing to speak up, like individual speaking up is very difficult. Are you going then for the way that you want to reach a collectively speak up culture, or is that not possible to go that direction?
Well, I would never advise anybody to speak up unless they felt safe to do so. And despite the fact that we have a new EU whistleblower directive and people are becoming more conscious of the fact that we need to speak up in order to tackle corruption, I think it's very much an individual decision. And quite simply, if you are a refugee in a small community in a poor country, you are going to think twice about reporting perhaps a humanitarian worker for sexual abuse who's actually providing you with the food, who has a relationship with maybe the chief of the village, if you like. It's really about the power dynamics. People think twice about speaking up contingent on what sort of retaliation they will be inflicted on them. Of course, I know that you've covered the case of Yasmin Mortajami on your program, and yes, her courageous stand as one of the world's top food safety scientists against Nestle has, with Swiss justice, what she has endured on retaliation-wise in a first world country is unfathomable. And so imagine without the so-called checks and balances in place, how it is for people with, less of a democratic structure, if you will.
Absolutely. Yes. Yasmin, was a pleasure, and very good insights received. Also, I had other world famous whistleblowers like Javier Justo, who was revealing the 1MDB scandal, or Rudolf Elmer from Julius Baer, who was also well known worldwide. They both, and all these whistleblowers went through a lot on the retaliation front. Now, why is it still happening when so many big corporates or NGOs promote, oh, we have a HR department, we have an ethics department, we have a hotline for whistleblowers? Why does it still end up in these devastating cases?
That's a really fabulous question. I think one of the issues is that when we set up these structures and systems, we are putting the departments that investigate within the company. And what we don't have is a separate investigatory body which is outside of the company to take care of the investigation side. So, for example, we saw with the Trump administration, when the policing function meets the investigation function, the policing or investigation function meets the political function, you are always going to get pushback from the political function on the policing function or investigation function. And inevitably, politics will trump investigation. So we saw that with the head, I think it was the FBI in the US. And of course, the Secretary General, the current Secretary General, came into power in 2017, elected, and said, I will reform whistleblower protection. We know it's been a catastrophic failure in the United Nations between 2006 and 2016. I will improve it. And indeed, he did usher in a new policy, but it's been operated within the same structure and the same system. And in fact, at one time there was just one office, but now it's been delegated down to each agency which serves under the chief. So there's always going to be that control element, because ultimately nobody wants reputational damage, and people want to control investigations, and they want to ensure that it's managed properly. And so that's not independent, actually. So it's just it's the human condition. Nobody wants to hang out their dirty washing for the neighbors to see, if you will.
Okay, that explains, of course, a lot. It reminds me a bit on this, as we called them earlier, the Russian investigations. So basically, the investigator is the boss themselves, and then the result is already determined before the investigation starts. So this needs to come out of the investigation. So how do we get there? Do you have the same experience?
Yes, well, yeah, control of investigations it's legendary. That the higher it's very political, and so there are lots of examples in history where investigations have been sat on, and in the book, the upcoming book, the United Nations Whistleblowers and Retaliation, one of the chiefs of the investigation division talks about the political control that is exercised, from the Secretary General's office. And of course, the Secretary General has to listen to the 193 member states. So, if you have 3 Undersecretary Generals from one particular country that are all, for example, convicted of fraud, then there's going to be pushback from that particular country to the Secretary General, and he's between a rock and a hard place, because a lot of the senior positions in the UN are taken up by former senior politicians in various countries. So they move across to the UN and bring with them maybe some of the practices that go with senior politicians. And of course, it all filters down into the organization.
Yeah, okay. That explains a lot, Caroline. Yes. Yeah, it's in different fields, very similar, like we talk about the finance and the NGO. It's basically, there's a bit of a pattern visible. Yeah. Now, yeah, I think the whole goal,
I believe, yeah. And it's always about checks and balances. And what we need ultimately is more transparency. So one of the reasons that in the UN we were able to bring some of these practices to light, that the fact that the UN is not protecting its whistleblowers, is the practice of judicial review, asking one of the UN judges to take a look at the case. And what the UN judges found, there's only been 4 cases where whistleblower protection was reviewed, and the judges found error in 100% of cases. And so that is a damning indictment on the office that's responsible for protecting people. And of course, it doesn't encourage people to speak up about corruption or sexual abuse or whatever's going wrong, in the system. And it's a crying shame, because ultimately whistleblowers are the #1 source of corruption and identification of, fraud and abuse. So it's a gift, really. But not just the UN, lots of organizations struggle with getting this right, as you said.
It should be seen as a gift for society, but it's probably not a gift for some.
That's true, because, ultimately, often what happens, I think you've worked in the financial sector. When things are going wrong in an organization, you can guarantee not just the whistleblower, but there's a critical mass of individuals which know what's going on. And one of the things about when somebody speaks up, they make everybody else look bad because they knew it was going on at the same time, but they said nothing. And yes, it's what we call the bystander effect. Yeah. And it's part of the human, fight and flight, neurological process. Because obviously nobody wants to get fired. Yet, lots of whistleblowers do. And so people see what's going on, but they don't speak up because they don't feel safe enough to speak up.
Very good point. Before, Caroline, you mentioned your book. And before I prepared a bit for our video broadcast, I looked into it. It looks good. Is it already out to be published, or is it going to be published? Or tell us a bit more about it, please.
So, well, thank you for mentioning the book, Joe. It's I'm what's called a co-editor and co-author. So this is a group of
it's here. Yeah.
Yes.
Your book.
So yeah. It's work in progress. It's due out at the end of this year or the beginning of next year with Bristol University Press. And the idea of it is, I mean, I don't know if you ever studied international relations, but, the way that we look at international relations is, very often structures and so forth. But actually, the way that we learn, having been in teaching now for over a decade, is by stories. And the stories of the whistleblowers are absolutely riveting. And they teach you so much about the internal structure of the organization and how it actually operates in practice. So I really hope that they will serve academia. And we chose to launch the book as an academic book, and which is one of the reasons it's taking so much time, because it has to be peer reviewed by all the the professors involved with the publication, and it's quite lengthy. So, but although it's academic, it's going to be very readable, and hopefully interesting, because I think the way that our institutions are going, as we've seen throughout this COVID period, is that things have just simply got to change, because the level of dysfunction that's emerging, the lack of transparency, and the absence of truth to stakeholders is astonishing.
Yes. The absence of truth to the shareholders, that's astonishing. Exactly. I get this feedback very often, and it's actually scary. But I'm still have hope, because I see universities, especially professors like you, and I had another interview partner, Mr. Grasso, who is also in the UK, a professor. I feel there's a bit of movement towards getting the world a better place with educating students, at least trying to, yeah. But it's also probably a long process.
Yes, I think that what's inspiring for me, I teach graduate level students, is in some ways we're a bit of a lost generation. I mean, we allowed a lot of what's gone on to have gone on. I mean, we have yesterday we had the Dominic Cummings turn whistleblower here in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And, the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have to explain themselves today. So, but what is inspiring is Generation Z that are coming up. That these young people, they are critical thinkers. They do not watch mainstream media anymore. I mean, they have lost faith in what's been reported. And they're going to their own sources of truth. And that is so inspiring. And I have to say, when I go into the lecture theatre, I go in with my piece, but I learn so much from them. And yeah, their quest for truth, search for knowledge and justice is absolutely inspiring.
100% with you. In my professional life, I learned a lot from the younger generation. Of course, we learn from our kids, from youngsters, from students, and from the youngsters, I really learned critical thinking. They really they smash, or they don't even, they are not interested in mainstream media anymore because of that, what you just said. Yeah, very good. So for diversity reasons, of course, when what's his name again, in England, Cumming or
Dominic Cummings? Yes, he's
Dominic Cummings. Yeah. So maybe Melinda Gates also wants to do the female part, to be a bit of a whistleblower. Who knows? Maybe she comes out and says, "Hey, now I stand up, I speak up." But let's see what's coming. Now we are almost done, Caroline. I could continue speaking with you. It's very interesting. Now, last but not least, because don't do it like Joe. It's founded almost a year ago, and it was founded on the principle of basically Chuck Ma, when he says, in life, you learn more from failure than from the success. You just have to take it as a lesson. Can you share one story of you, or from a student, or anything what you think is interesting for our audience, where you think that was a good lesson to learn, move on?
A good lesson to learn, move on. Oh, that is such an excellent question. And so many mistakes that I could come up with. Let me think. I mean, just one that's coming to mind is the tactics. I mean, this is the tobacco industry, and there was a testimony before Congress in which the top 7 CEOs of tobacco went before Congress, and they were asked, does nicotine damage the health? And each CEO said, no, sir, I do not. So they basically lied before Congress, and the reason they got out of it is that they gotten legal counsel before, and they said, I believe, and because they'd used the words believe, they got out of it. But I think the culture of denial, which is used by lawyers that defend the unacceptable, is really a mistake. And we have got to move beyond the culture of denial, which, as I say, is bred by lawyers and litigation. And it's just passé. And I don't think the next generation are going to accept it. It just wastes too much time. It's like we all make mistakes, and we have to create an environment where we are open to surmounting mistakes and learning from them. And yes, a lot of the big corporate hierarchical structures would rather put up this front of denial rather than, be open to learning from their mistakes. And that's a huge cultural change, which has got to take place in this generation. And we have to make it a safer place in the world for people to make mistakes. So yes, you caught me off guard there, but that one is definitely worth looking at. It's just 1 minute 40 on the YouTube channel, and then the congressman says, "But gentlemen, I've got the Surgeon General's report here on all this evidence which states the contrary. What do you have to say about it?" And it's just that you're at that level, and you've got this sort of denial going on, and that really is a mistake.
Yep. So maybe it was already before, but let's say the culture of denial. Maybe Bill Clinton did also his part to it a long time ago.
Oh yes, Monica.
Yes,
I don't have sex with that woman. Yes.
Yes, there was nothing. No, there was nothing. He said there was nothing. I don't know what this lady is talking about. The culture of denial. But anyway, it doesn't help when leaders do the same thing. And then they expect the society to change. You as I think we need to be very happy to have freedom fighters like you and many others to get something moving here. Yeah. Well, it is so interesting, this topic. So thank you very much, Caroline. It was a huge pleasure to speak with you. Do you have anything else you want to share with us, or we do another session in a couple of months?
I think that you've covered everything, and I'm so grateful for you talking about the book. And yes, no, I wish you the best of luck, you know, with your continued conversations. And I'm very honoured to have been asked to be on your show. So I bid you good morning for the rest of the morning from here in the UK.
Thank you very much, and warm greetings back to the UK. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Take care, Joe. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.